Hello, community, and welcome to another webinar where we take you through some of the most important topics you're talking about in community, key features we want you to know about, and deep dive into how you can better utilize your Google Cloud security tools. Before we jump in, I'd like to thank every one of you for taking the time out of your day here. I know people are still trickling in, so we'll let you jump in, but we're really excited that you're here to learn with us. We hope that the subjects and topics that we choose in these webinar series help you with your day-to-day responsibilities and protect against the evil forces out there. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to all of our community members. Without you, we would not be growing and the active community that we are today. So thank you for your participation and your continued support in the community. Keep coming in, keep asking questions, keep reading all our content, and let us know what else we can do to help make you successful. And then lastly, I'd like to thank all of you that included your honest questions for today's webinar. We have a nice long list, and we'll be answering them during our conversation today. And also, this is a good reminder to let you all know that this is an interactive webinar. So if you don't get your questions answered, please post them in the chat. We want to hear from you. We want to answer your questions. We want to make sure that we're showing you what you need help with during this demonstration. And then if you'd like to go back and watch today's demonstration, or for those of you that haven't had a chance to watch this, we'll be posting this recording under Resource Center, under webinars and podcasts. So look for that post coming in the next few days. We do have a few admin items that we'll need to cover here. If you haven't seen these Agentic SOC workshops, these are free workshops that are designed to help you build real-world skills to transform your defenses with AI. Take a look at some of the new cities that we are hosting these webinars in. And if there's some local to you, sign up. These are incredible workshops, definitely worth it, especially since they are free of charge. I also want to remind you of some upcoming webinars we have coming here to community. On November 11th, we have a Transforming All the Things Google SecOps Authentication with Third-Party Identity Providers. That'll be a great webinar on November 11th with Jay Aware. And then we have a Parser Best Practices webinar coming December 2nd. More details coming to this. Check out the events section in community when this goes live. We do have some community resources I wanted to remind you all about. These are our onboarding guides and adoption guides. So whether you're new to these Google Cloud security tools or would like a refresher, our onboarding guides are really helpful step-by-step instructional details to deploy your products. We have videos in there that can help with the walkthroughs and examples. And then if you're looking to up-level your skills and adopt your tools further, our adoption guides have specific use cases that we'll walk you through with desired outcomes that we can help you achieve. And then also we have user groups. We're adding a bunch of different user groups globally. So look for some local meetups popping up near you. The value of these user groups is you get to go meet in person with other local security practitioners like you, solve problems, network, learn about Google Cloud security, learn how your colleagues and peers in the industry are using tools that you are, and learn from each other. A great resource to have in your pocket there. And then I think actually that might be it. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we'll be talking about the forwarder deprecation and how to use Open Telemetry collectors and Bindplane as a new resource for that tool. And with us today, we have Utsav Lathia, James Brodsky, and Craig Lee. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Craig, I think you are a repeat offender here, so this is your third time here. Thanks for all your support with these webinars. But it's really nice to have you here. Glad you're here to share what is upcoming with this forwarded deprecation and how to use Bindplane. You know, I thought for those of us that are new to SecOps, or maybe need to have a better understanding of why the deprecation of this forwarder is so important and why using Bindplane will fulfill that need, maybe one of you could give us like a quick high level of what this means and what are maybe the top things that we should focus on today during your demonstration.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So, hey everyone, I'm Utsav. I think that today, the big things that I would love for you all to take away is understanding, what is the deprecation of the forwarder? When does it take place? And, what tools do we have for you to move off of the forwarder, right? And so learning a bit about Open Telemetry and Bindplane as one of those options, and just understanding what it can do for you that the forwarder did and what else it can do for you that maybe you weren't able to do with the forwarder as well.
Great. Really excited. Awesome. Thank you, Utsav. Well, I'll let you all take it away from here. So on to the demonstration.
Cool. Let's talk through it. Yeah. So today we're just going to go through, the forwarder. We're going to talk about Bindplane. We're going to give you an actual live demo of it. And we're going to talk about how you can migrate over and the different features coming out. So that's kind of the goal of today's session here. So let's talk through the legacy forwarder deprecation. We'll go through all of the important dates at the end of this, but the key date to keep in mind is that January 2027, so a little bit more than a year from now, is when we will be considering the legacy forwarder to be deprecated. So you have a little over a year to transition. We gave a lot of time because we know a lot of customers, have a lot of inbuilt forwarder use cases. And we've also set up a really good way to move over to what is the Open Telemetry collector. And so Open Telemetry, meaning that it's based on the open source collector, as well as with Bindplane server that manages those collectors, manages the configs of those collectors. You can set up processors with a UI, all that sort of fun stuff. And so we're going to show you in a live demo what that is. And this lets you scale and bring all your logs into SecOps as you want. And it's one of those options that you have as you're moving away from the forwarder is using Open Telemetry and Bindplane. But as a reminder, we support all sorts of ways you want to bring your data in. And so whether that's through, cloud feeds, through other third-party vendors, all sorts of things there, we will support bringing your data into SecOps from wherever you have it, right? And so let's talk about Bindplane specifically, right? So Bindplane is Otel, Open Telemetry based. It gives you one unified place that you can manage collecting and bringing your data into SecOps, right? So you get this centralized control on the Bindplane server that you can control all of your collectors that are running in your environment. You can roll out configuration changes. You can choose whether that server is running on Bindplane's cloud, on your own cloud, on-prem. And the most important thing for you all is that we cover the costs. So if you are a customer, you fall into certain tiers in SecOps and you get these different tiers of Bindplane that are listed out on the right here. Either you get the Bindplane Google Edition or the Bindplane Enterprise Google Edition. And we'll talk about more of like what is different across those two. But in both of them, you can bring in all your data from any of your different sources and bring it into SecOps. So I want to pass off here to James Brodsky to talk about moving from the forwarder to Bindplane.
Awesome. Thank you, Utsav. I appreciate that. I am James Brodsky. I lead the global security architects here at Google. And as you can see here, there are 5 points I'm going to cover for you to consider when you're moving off of the Chronicle legacy forwarders and using Bindplane collectors in their place. And the first thing is the fact that this is a single agent, regardless of platform, right? which we certainly couldn't necessarily say about the old forwarder. It kind of had completely different installation routines on Linux versus Windows. There were some different supported capabilities. It required Docker very often on Windows. And in addition, the amount of targets that or systems that you can put this new collector on is pretty vast. And so the collector, and sometimes, unfortunately, I use the term agent, but I mean the same thing, installs on Linux, Windows, and Mac hosts, both for servers and endpoints. Linux targets include Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, Oracle Linux, Red Hat, SUSE, and Amazon Linux. So a lot of the major distros are covered. It also installs on recent versions of Mac OS and Windows Server 2016 through I think 2025, as well as supporting Windows 10 and Windows 11, and installs on bare metal, VMs, Kubernetes, Docker, and so forth. Lots of different capabilities that are there. The old forwarder only supported a handful of those Linux distros and only a handful of Windows systems and no Mac support. So this is giving you this single agent, which is really nice, based off of the Otel standards. Most importantly, it's manageable, updatable from that single console called the Bindplane server that Utsav was mentioning. There's a significant amount of sources you can configure. There's almost 100 of them. A lot of those are generic in nature, like syslog collector, TCP, UDP, file collector, Google Cloud Storage, Azure Event Hub, AWS is another one. And then there's specific ones, right? Like macOS Unified Logging, Microsoft 365, Oracle Database, lots of others. The collector can also act as a gateway. So it has a bunch of different destinations that are supported. Typical ones like, of course, Google SecOps, but also Google Cloud Storage, and then third-party destinations as well. So Splunk, Hack, Elasticsearch, Kafka, Microsoft Sentinel, Snowflake, a lot of them. There's like something like 50 different destinations that are there. And then because it can be a gateway too, right, there we support a lot of advanced data filtering and transformation. And that's done with a component called processors. And that allows for a huge set of data pipeline management capabilities. From basic to advanced, you can stack them on top of one another. You can use them in conjunction, and there's about 40 of those. And some of them do data transformation, like copy field, delete empty values, move field, add field, rename, transform, stuff like that. Some of them parse, like parsing CSVs or XML or regex or JSON key value pairs. Some of them filter, same types of things like regex and condition and severity. Then there's some enrichment processors as well. They do redaction of sensitive data, look up fields and external data tables, rewrite timestamps, and then aggregation processors. Now, you can't use all that stuff that I just listed off with all the Bindplane licenses from Google, but all the ones that don't redact or delete or filter data, you can use those with any Google Bindplane licenses. So the important part that I want you to take away is you're getting a very capable data pipeline management system in addition to a collector based on open standards, and it supports a significant amount of the technology that you probably have in your environment. So there's a few things the old forwarder did that we realized that we have to provide parity features for in the Bindplane collector, and that's the database log ingestion, PCAP, and Splunk integration, like you have there on the slide. And I'll hit on each one of those briefly. For database collection, we didn't really have anything natively built into the Chronicle forwarder to support that. So if you wanted to grab Oracle logs or Microsoft SQL audit logs, for instance, you kind of have to find another way of converting those to a flat file or a TCP stream and sending those into the forwarder. So there's more to break when you do that. And we would sometimes recommend other agents besides to or in addition to the forwarder. You can certainly do that same type of architecture with Bindplane if you want, but we give you several new options with Bindplane. So there's an Oracle database log collector that you provide a SID for and other credentials, and it retrieves the logs. And that's a similar setup for Postgres and for MySQL. And there's some other ones like Cassandra, CouchDB as well. Then there's also a generic SQL query input, and you can use that to connect to a database via TLS, run a query against any supported database, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Postgres, Oracle, Snowflake, and then the rows that you've specified from the table are returned and ingested into your target. The old forwarder, speaking about PCAP, The old forwarder did have a PCAP capture functionality. But to be honest, very few customers were taking advantage of it. And it used libpcap on Linux, and it used npcap on Windows. So there were some requirements there. And you needed to get that up and running properly and maintain those separate distributions. With a Bindplane collector, you maintain the collection infrastructure for packet capture, and then you just stream it over TCP to an open port on the collector. And then finally, Splunk. The old forwarder had the capability of running an SPL search and ingesting the results. And the problem with that is that it's a bit of a bottleneck, because when you do that, the search is so reliant on the forwarder itself running through Splunk Search API. And you can still do that with Bindplane if you want to. There is a Splunk Search API SPL query input. And it works just fine for I would say, smaller amounts of data or infrequent ingestion. But to properly ingest a lot more data, or to copy copies of like live data in motion, it's really better to use Splunk's standard method of ingest to third-party systems, which these days is opposed to the HTTP event collector, or HEC. So any existing technology that you might have in your environment that sends Splunk HEC, you can send that to Bindplane as well. And those events get converted into OTLP format, and they can be sent anywhere. You can also set up Bindplane to send to a Splunk HEC endpoint if you still need to send some data to your Splunk endpoint during a migration capability. So you can do that as well. Let me hit the next slide here. As I mentioned previously, there's lots of receivers for Bindplane available. This really opens up easier ways of collecting data from a multitude of sources, especially on-prem sources. It's not just logs. You can collect metrics and traces too. You can put those into Google Cloud Monitoring. And this is a super common pattern for things like Windows Event Log, syslog, Splunk forwarders, databases, etc. Multiple destinations, Google SecOps, of course, Google Cloud Logging, third-party systems. Without Bindplane, you're kind of limited. With the old forwarder technology as well, you're really limited to what you could do, right? So you can use parsers, you could use parser extensions against the data coming into Google SecOps. But with Bindplane, you have this myriad of processors that become available to do filtering, redacting, transforming. And you think about stuff like multi-line event support, complex event breaking to large events, and batching data, sampling data, data aggregation, enrichment in the stream, other things like that. The old forwarder was not capable of those types of things. Much more flexible architecture, because you can distribute Bindplane collectors out to the edge, use them in gateway mode to perform processing at aggregation points across networks as well. And then that Otel focus that Utsav mentioned, the good news is this isn't a proprietary agent, right? It's a fork of the Otel agent. It's got additions to it, the inclusion of the op-amp protocol, which allows for that central configuration, the monitoring, and deployment of the agent. So if you've been following Otel for any time, you should be super comfortable with the idea of the Otel technology as collectors and gateways. And so that centralized management capability, that flexibility to support all these different sources and destinations, configured from a console, allowing you to route, filter, and redact and transform, truly gives you a pretty capable end-to-end data pipeline management system as well, and not just what we had with the Chronicle folder. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Craig Lee.
Awesome. Thanks, James. So hello, everybody. My name is Craig Lee, Principal Partner Engineer over here at Bindplane. So happy to talk to you about this. And if you have any other questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll definitely make sure to go through those at the end here. But let's go ahead and start talking about the Bindplane architecture. So at a high level, things are very flexible, what we're able to do. Bindplane itself, which is what you see on the top there, that is the actual server. So the purpose of it is to manage, you can command and control all of these various Open Telemetry collectors. They are connected via that dotted line. That is the op-amp protocol. So that's an open source protocol to where the collectors which are living in your environment will connect back to Bindplane. Bindplane itself can either be SaaS hosted, which is the easiest way, frankly, to sign up. It's open sign up, especially for the Google license, and you can get started. Or you can choose to self-host. When you self-host, you can even support a completely isolated network environment. So if you have more strict security controls, we can also work with those with the self-hosted environment. But the key point is And the next bullet point is that Bindplane itself does not ingest any of the telemetry data. The actual collection happens on the Open Telemetry collectors. So perhaps you have a Windows system or syslog coming from like a firewall, something of that nature. The actual collection and the processing of that data is then sent from the collector and then onto the gateway, and then ultimately onto those SecOps APIs. So that is that more common path. Or you can send from the Open Telemetry collectors directly to those SecOps APIs. So that is also supported. And finally, at the bottom here, when we mentioned that non-Otel agent, when James was talking about us supporting things like Splunk Heck, that means we can work within a Splunk environment. So if they have things like universal forwarders, sending something like the Splunk Edge processor, we can gather an Open Telemetry stream from that or Splunk Heck stream from that. We can also support other agents sending things like OTLP or perhaps like a syslog type of output. So we can coexist, with different types of configurations and different agents within your customer's environment. So moving to the next slide here, this is also architecture, but a few more details. I just wanted to highlight a couple things here. So on the left-hand side, this is an example of the Bindplane Cloud, the SaaS type of service. Again, open sign up. All of those Open Telemetry collectors connect back to Bindplane via port 443. This is that op-amp protocol. It's, again, open source, and that is over TLS. The actual connection is initiated from the Open Telemetry collector. The WebSocket session is established back to Bindplane Cloud, where we can then manage, get the health of that collector, and ultimately push down configurations, like I'll show within the demo. So we have that type of flow established. And then if you look in the middle here, we have a few different Open Telemetry collectors. So today we can actually support a variety of Open Telemetry collectors. The default experience is what we call BDOT, the Bindplane distribution for Open Telemetry. And that's available out of the box. It's a single line installer, very easy to use. But we do have options where customers can even build their own distribution of the Open Telemetry collector, which we can then also manage within Bindplane. So again, we're trying to be very flexible to what customers need there. They can then, from those collectors, send data to a gateway. And that gateway, as you see here from the architecture perspective, very similar in how it fits within the environment to a Chronicle forwarder today. So what I would recommend, and I'll show this off in the demo, is basically swapping that out one for one, where perhaps you have going into Chronicle forwarder many different syslog sources. We can support that by having a different source configuration for each one of those syslog log collection types, and we can just swap that in. So that's kind of the easy way to get things going. And then we can extend that type of collection onto the endpoints from the Open Telemetry collector. Finally, at the bottom here, you can see an example where the Bindplane collector can send data directly to SecOps. The gateway part is optional. So there are some advantages for aggregating data, but you can send data directly. It's not an issue there. Last piece I'll note too, for some customers, they will choose to put the Bindplane gateway in an edge network, something like a DMZ network. And then that way they can have systems that are isolated from that type of external connection to the Google APIs and use that gateway as that jumping off point. But then at that point, they can control that network flow. So I'll go ahead after this and jump to a demo. So just give me 1 second here to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll take a look at Bindplane. Okay, great. Looks like Bindplane interface is working for the screen share. All right, I'll go ahead and dive in. So this is what Bindplane looks like overall. Again, Bindplane is two things, basically. You have an Open Telemetry collector, which we are managing. Those we call agents within Bindplane itself. Those are managed via that op-amp protocol. And then the Bindplane server, which you see here. When you go to the overview, when you first log in, you'll see something like this, where you will see data on multiple configurations. And a configuration is the definition of the sources, the processors, and the routing and the destinations you are sending that data to. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some examples. So we're sending most of our data to SecOps, but in parallel, we're also sending data to things like Google Cloud for observability type of use cases, perhaps Google Cloud logging. And then also for long-term archival purposes to something like Google Cloud Storage. And we could support that today. So we'll often see that where folks will need to primarily send to SecOps, but then for long-term storage, again, they will move that data off to Google Cloud Storage, and we have full support for that. So diving in a bit further, I like to start on a summary view. And now I can see the total number of these collected or these connected agents. So I see 8 connected, 3 disconnected, several that are outdated, and we make everything very easy for you to manage at scale. So we can support up to 1 million different Open Telemetry collectors to a single tenant. And I can, for example, click on this outdated list, and I could even do like a group update if I wanted to. So we have a lot of lifecycle features like that within Bindplane. And looking at the summary, moving over to the data summary view, I can see that the logs going to my SecOps destination for the last 24 hours, I have about a gig in, and because of the data reduction we're doing, some of those filtering features, we have about a 10% savings here in what we're sending overall. So this gives you a good heads up view as to what things look like as far as the overall data flow and how much you are sending. So next, I'm going to talk about actually getting data into Bindplane. So the first thing you would do is go to Agents, Install Agent, and this is that Open Telemetry collector. I won't go through the full installation, but I'll just show this. If you click Next, everything is a single line installer, so we make it very easy for you to get started. But we also support any kind of config management, things like Ansible, Puppet, Chef, manual type of installations. We have instructions on that within our documentation. So again, we make things quick and easy for you to get started, but then we can go there. So now I'm going to show actually building a configuration and pulling data from some of our systems into SecOps. So go to Config, create configuration. And in this case, I'm going to go with Windows Events. So we'll call it WinEVT. And I have Bindplane Collector version 1, and I'll go ahead and pick Windows. But you can see the other type of operating systems and platforms that are supported. Click Next. And then now we'll go ahead and add source. So we have about 50 out of the box sources that are supported. Not all of these are friendly for security use cases. There are some that do parsing. So within the SecOps world, all of the parsing is done on the actual SecOps platform. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we move the data through. But for like these Windows use cases, we have Windows Events Trace and also Windows Events, which are definitely the most popular. But for things like pulling from syslog devices, we have the TCP source or the UDP source. So we have that available. And then some of the more open-ended sources, perhaps like things like file or CSV, are also very popular for pulling in from those custom applications. So for this demo, I'm going to go with Windows Events. And then the one thing that we will need to do here, specific to SecOps, is check raw logs. So when we are collecting things, we are not parsing at the actual collector level. We will be gathering things like attributes and for some metadata, but not doing parsing. That is done on the actual platform side. And then what I'll do just for demo purposes, I'll just start at beginning. So we do save state when we're sending data. So we will, if you, for example, start at end, we will not double send data in as we're going through. And we can support custom channels for things like Windows Event Forwarding or any kind of custom applications. So I'll go ahead and hit save. And that's it as far as configuration for the Windows side of it. And then we'll hit next and then add destination. So as James mentioned, we can send to some destinations outside of Google, and that's part of kind of different licensing. We'll talk about some of those differences later. But for the majority of the folks, they will have something that looks like this, where we can send to all the different Google destinations. These are included with the Bindplane Google Edition license. And then on top of that, we can also send to something called the Bindplane Gateway destination and to the DevNull destination, which is just used primarily for testing. So for this case, I'll go to SecOps. And from within the destination config, I have several destinations that are already saved. So all of the different components of these configurations can be saved and reused later on, and those will be found within our library as well. So if I go to create new, this is creating a new SecOps destination, and I can choose the different protocols. So gRPC and HTTPS are both supported, and we can support a variety of regions and then different auth methods. The majority of the time I see folks using JSON authentication because they're coming for things like on-prem or perhaps different clouds, and we have instructions on how to set that up with just a few steps within our docs. So for this, I'll go ahead and actually go back and go to the SecOps save configuration that I already have. So I'll call it SecOps. And I can see it's saved with that little bookmark, and then save config. So now I have a basic configuration. It's not actually doing anything yet, but if you ever want to see what is actually constructed here, I can click on View Configuration File, and now you can see that full Open Telemetry pipeline that is created as part of the actual Bindplane process. So now I will make this active by adding agents. It is filtering down to the agents that are compatible, in this case, Windows platform. I have 3 different Windows systems that are live, and hit apply. And then I'll go ahead and hit start rollout. So this is now rolling out the config to those 3 different Windows systems that are attached, but they were sitting idle. And I could see they're running configuration version 1. And then within a matter of a few seconds over that op-amp protocol, it's pushed the config, restarted the actual Windows service, and then everything is working there. So now I have 2 different processor nodes, and I'll go ahead and click on one of these. And what's happening here is it makes a sampling call. This is the only time you'll ever see your telemetry within Bindplane itself, and that is only it's only a one sampling call. It is ephemeral and is only part of this browser session, so it's not saved anywhere. And when I click on any of these events, I can see the raw XML of those Windows events. So this is good. We are pulling data successfully, and then this is what it would look like when we send data on over to SecOps. But we're going to go ahead and do a few things with processors. So next, I'm going to go ahead and go to Add Processor. And this is licensed for the full enterprise suite of processing. So I do a few things, for example, in the filter and reduce category that are not part of the regular Google edition. But if you are part of the regular Google edition, you will still get things like parsing, the ability to transform, and look up fields, for example. So in this case, I will add the SecOps standardization processor. And this is what I would recommend as a best practice for any pipeline going to SecOps. I'll go ahead and go to Create New, and then add a log type. And this log type corresponds to the log type within SecOps. And in the case of Windows, it's WinEVT log. That's the standard really for most Windows events. And I can find that list if I go to supported log types, and this will then pull that out from the documentation. So for example, like WinEVT log is available here. So I'll go to WinEVT log, and I can even go further too. I can do things like adding in the namespace. So these will all be UDM fields. So customer namespace A, we could throw that in there. Things like the ingestion labels, I like to add a lot of data for context. So perhaps the data center or the application, so the purpose of that data, perhaps the classification if it's sensitive data. We can add this in, and we can even use this later for filtering and routing. So let's go ahead and hit save. And now I will see within our processor view, which is a nice sandbox, what it would look like. So now we're adding in several attributes. So we can see things like Chronicle ingestion label, app, Chronicle log type, WinEVT log, and Chronicle namespace. And we're then sending those on. So I'll go ahead and hit save here. And now I have a configuration change that is staged, but we haven't rolled it out yet. So that rollout is pending. And I'll go ahead and click on Start Rollout. So what it's doing, it's over that op-amp protocol, and it's pushing down over the WebSocket session, the new config. It will then reset the collector process, and now those are back up and running, and you can see config version 2. So I can verify the changes by clicking on this, and then now I'm able to see on the right-hand side what that looks like for the different attributes that are added. So for a basic Windows configuration end-to-end, this is really all you have to do. And this is, in some ways, one of the features that is new. With the Bindplane collector, you are able to install those collectors on the endpoints and collect directly, whereas the Chronicle Forwarder was mainly geared around the remote collection type of use case, which we can also support. So we've set up a basic Windows collection end-to-end, and next I will dive a little bit further. So I'll go to my configurations. And then I have a new config that I've actually built for this webinar called SecOps Forwarder Replacement. And I'll just go ahead and talk through this one. So this is actually running on several different Linux systems. And what it's doing is we are sending things from a firewall. So we have syslog data. We're collecting locally some audit logs. I have a local application file, the Bindplane agent's own logs, and then also this Palo Alto port that we've opened for this particular source. And we're sending all this data to SecOps, and then I'm also routing some of the audit files, say for an example, operations use case, to Google Cloud. So I have that here. So I'll just go ahead and start to kind of click through what I've constructed. So when we click on the process review for the network firewalls, and we'll go ahead and run that sample again. I can go ahead and open up one of these. And for example, we have syslog data coming through. And then on the right-hand side, we are doing things like we're parsing out the severity, and we're also doing things with the standardization processor to actually set the log types here. So I can see that when I go through. And the log type is set to NIC system. And then I can say for the next log type of the audit logs, I also have a standardization processor here, which is setting log type to audit D, and then also adding in the various UDM fields for ingestion labels. And then we can go further, and I can see things like this application file, and we have that set here as well. So that's Nick system. And then this is kind of an interesting one I wanted to highlight. So the actual agent's logs can be sent directly to SecOps as well. And this is great for troubleshooting, especially, or perhaps you're looking at what the status of the actual collector is. So I can go ahead and open this up. And we actually have a processor here where we're doing some sampling. So we're sampling those agent logs and only sending the high severity logs over to SecOps. And then I'm setting the log type here to Bindplane agent. So sending that on. So we have all these different log types. Again, this can be similar to what you're doing today with your Chronicle Forwarder, where you have different ports that are open for the various sources. And then it's very easy for just to go to source. And you can do something like this, where you go TCP logs, set the listener port, and then now you have a new source that is available. So moving forward and looking at our pipeline a bit further, everything is going to SecOps, and you can see that we actually have a down arrow here where we are reducing some data by about 73%. And this is some of those enterprise features that are included with SecOps Enterprise Plus today, or part of Bindplane Enterprise Edition. And what we're doing here is we are redacting some sensitive data. So in this case, I actually have it set up to filter out, or redact rather, IPv4 addresses and emails and things of that nature. And then I can see here where on the right-hand side, when we're doing that type of redaction, those come through as asterisks. So we're filtering it at the source level. And then something else we're doing is we're filtering by severity. So we're filtering out all of our low severity, where the minimum severity of our logs is now error. And what's great about that is we can even see feedback in the bottom. 109 logs as part of the sample. And then after the filtering, we have 44 logs after the processing. So that is all set up there. And the last thing too, and I'm not going to quite demo this piece, is we're copying the host name to ingestion source, which allows for silent host monitoring. And there's some great write-ups on the Google documentation on how we can enable silent host monitoring. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pause there. I think I walked through the Bindplane overview, the agent installation, basic config, and then a more advanced config for what we had for the Chronicle Forwarder. So at here, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and pass things back over to Utsav.
Well, thank you, Craig. Really appreciate you walking through that. And I think the key thing to take away, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in Bindplane, is just, one, how intuitive their UI is, right? To set something up and just roll out your configs and set your processors, right? It just kind of makes sense. It shows the data flowing. You can go and set up your processors to do exactly what you want. And we do have a lot of current SecOps customers using this. So this is a tried and tested method here. So thanks, Craig, for showing that. Cool. So I just wanted to talk through a few of the features that we have that we've released in part of Bindplane that to bring parity with what we had in the forwarder. And a few of these we actually did recently just talk about. James kind of walked us through a few of them. So, we have our database log ingestion. We have our terms of service that is actually now rolled up. So if you're using the Google Bindplane, if you're using the Bindplane on-prem server, then that terms of service rolls up to the Google Cloud terms of service, right? And so instead of having to have two separate ones, one with Google and one with Bindplane, you have this option for you or customers to basically have that set up there. James talked about the SPL source. We have a PCAP source coming out very soon, and our documentation page is now completely revamped with some good best practices, some use cases, some really good getting started guides on the Google side, and there's some good linkage out to the Bindplane documentation as well. So those are just a few of the highlights, but it's been really exciting to see, like, every week, every month, like, new features coming out for SecOps customer use cases. And so a lot of cool stuff to be used there. Cool. And then I just wanted to sort of give folks just the overview of the specific timeline related to the forwarder deprecation. At the end of last month is when kind of all the information was rolled out and everyone was made aware of the forwarder deprecation, and you can see listed out there. The community call is that's today, and so we're happy to have you all here. And then kind of the upcoming things coming up is that April 1st is when we're going to have a Google built Otel collector, and so that's the ability to use that Google built version as opposed to just as an option from using the Bindplane built one. And then the next 3 dates are the timelines for that forwarder deprecation, right? And so we have that April 1st date for new SecOps customers. So if you're brand new to the product after April 1st, then you don't use the forwarder. And so for many of you in this call, you're already current customers of SecOps, and so that wouldn't apply to you. So the next date that applies to you is that January 1st, right? And so that's a little over a year from now. That's when the forwarder is considered end of life, and when we'll stop releasing any patches, security patches, all that sort of stuff. And then we'll give you an additional 3 months after we consider it to be end of life to then go and stop the data from flowing in from the forwarder, right? And so you got about a year and a half before data needs to be migrated fully over, right? And so those are kind of the key dates. Want to make sure folks have plenty of leeway, plenty of time. As you saw, moving over to Bindplane is actually not too difficult of a task. And so we wanted to make sure you had the time, especially for folks who have a lot of forwarders deployed. Cool. And with that, I wanted to give kind of that call to action for you all. If you're interested, if this is the first time you've seen Bindplane, like this is where you go, bindplane.com/Google. You can also go to our Google SecOps documentation page, where we have a page called Using the Bindplane Agent, and you can kind of sign up from either of those two spots, and they all link to each other there. And so that's kind of where you get started. We can walk you through for if you're kind of any tier of SecOps, you can get the right edition that applies to you, see what features apply, and sort of start rolling that out. So with that, we wanted to kind of open up for questions. I know that there are some questions coming in the chat, and a lot of them have actually been answered by James and Craig and others. But what questions, I don't know, Craig, James, Matt, if you're seeing other ones that we want to kind of call out and answer live?
Yes, let's go ahead and say that there are a few questions around MSSPs and partners. So go ahead and reach out to me. I'll throw some contact information in the chat here. But we have several different MSSPs. In fact, we have them around the world that are using Bindplane today. From an architecture perspective, some of them are implementing it on behalf of customers. So customer signs up, they will then configure Bindplane and then really hand that off. That is one possible model. And we have other models where folks are choosing either self-host Bindplane or have a deeper relationship with us where they have a more of a multi-tenant type of strategy. So yeah, happy to interact with any partner and make sure that your team is enabled with the proper architecture.
I also saw another question from Corey Montgomery. Is there a FIPS mode similar to Splunk UF? And then I think, Corey, you added some context to that. So I don't know if we had an opportunity to maybe answer that question there.
For that one, I will have to talk to our engineering team. I don't have the answer for that right off the top of my head.
Okay, great. For some of these questions that we don't have the answers to, we'll post them in the webinar post. So look for your answers there, and we'll at you, and we'll mention you in the post. Another question, I think, James, maybe this is for you, from Caroline Costa. The syslog is not reachable even after the firewall rules allowing external connections. Do we have a troubleshooting guide for this? I know you kind of wanted to ask some questions that maybe Caroline.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good one to take offline, because I mean, we're going to get into your standard troubleshooting about how is the collector installed, whether or not there's a local firewall blocking things, is there some sort of hardening mode on whatever host it's been installed on, all sorts of different things we can look at there, and I'm happy to follow up personally on that one.
Great.
Probably a harder thing to troubleshoot on a webinar like this.
Right.
Yeah. There was a question recently in here about license. Yes, Stephen Tomlinson clarify what features are not available in the Bindplane Google edition? Maybe I'll throw that one over to Utsav.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk through that. Yeah, so I'll also put the link in the chat space as well, where we have our documentation that walks through it. But the key thing to call out is from the Bindplane Google Edition and the Bindplane Enterprise Google Edition, the additional features is you get much more advanced filtering, right? So in the Google Edition, you have filter by regex. In the advanced one, you have a lot of different ways you can filter. You have redaction, so you can mask your sensitive data. And then you also have transformation capabilities. So you have like all the ones, the Google Edition has some basic transformations. The Enterprise Google Edition has an advanced set of that. So that's kind of on the processor side, the differences. And then the other difference is on the destination side. And so for both of them, you can send to any Google destinations, meaning you can send to SecOps, cloud logging, Google Cloud Storage, BigQuery, all of those. For the Enterprise Google Edition, you can send to a non-Google destination for 12 months, right? And so we see that be used a lot of times for like a SIM migration, but we've also seen other use cases for folks who want to go and sort of route their data elsewhere for some amount of time. And if you want to route for longer than that, there's also pathways to purchase different tiers that let you do that as well.
We got a question coming in from Rahim for MSSP. Can we segregate individual clients' configuration within the same instance, not allowing other clients to see other client configurations?
Yeah, so with that one, what we can do is within Bindplane itself, there's kind of two different ways to break up the actual account. One is at the organization level. So when you first sign up, you will create a new organization. Generally, that's a one-for-one mapping. So the licensing actually maps license or customer to the organization. Everything is unique within that organization. And then within the organization, we follow that Google type of paradigm with a concept of projects. So then the projects will have unique agents, unique configurations. And then what's great from an MSSP perspective is you can be added to several different customers, organizations, and then their own projects. So then you will have access to those systems, but then the customers will only see their actual isolated resources within that project.
Great, thanks, Craig. I have another one for you from Nick Platt. In the scenario where we use the remote collector model to collect from log sources where the agent cannot be installed, are there any recommended specifications for the remote collector host to understand how many port listener collectors can be hosted on the same server?
Mm-hmm. Great. So Nick, it's similar to what I showed within that last configuration. I know that was a little more basic, right? I had 2 remote TCP sources. What I envision for your type of use case, it depends what your scale is, you will have a different source for each one of those firewall types or each one of those different types of syslog emitters. And then so you would then set that up. And then as far as scaling goes, practically there is not too much of a limit as far as the maximum number of systems. Obviously, there's limits, things like ports on your actual collector. The actual collector's limitations is more on throughput. And we have some guidelines within our documentation.
Great. Thanks, Craig. I have another one for you from Andrew Klotz. Earlier, you mentioned cloud is always what you recommend. For an MSSP, would it be best to own a BP cloud and have a separate project for each customer, have each customer own their own BP cloud instance, or have each of them use their own on-prem instance of Bindplane? Obviously, there are going to be situations where each one is better, but what is the best practice here?
Excellent question. So we have supported all 3 of those. Again, there are best practices. What I would say as a default and what most of our MSSP customers are doing is for each customer, have them sign up on their behalf to have their own organization. That way the licensing and the customer owns that org. So that effectively, if something happens with your agreement with a customer or something with that type of data sovereignty, that is within that organization, the MSSP engineers can then be added to that customer's organization and then have full access. So they can set it up. And then again, if the customer decides to move on, they still own that type of Bindplane instance, and that licensing is tied to that customer directly.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Another one from Anurag. Excuse me for the name if I slaughtered your name there. But can you have an overview on how to read logs from a log file?
No, excellent question. So pretty common use case. I didn't go in depth, but it did show in that last configuration, there is a file source there. So if you create a basic config, install the collector on the system where the file lives, add a file source, and then you basically just specify the directory path. That's the easy way to do it. Once things are set up, you can of course do a lot of things with parsing. For example, parsing out things like JSON or timestamps, and that is all supported within the Bindplane pipeline.
Great, thank you, Craig. Another one for you from Josh. Please clarify what to ask Google CE regarding data plane API and ingestion source metrics. We've opened support cases with Google, and they said it's a feature request for 2026. Currently, the only way to get the ingestion source metric populated in cloud monitoring is via the gRPC backstory API.
Yeah, I can chat through this one. So yeah, today with gRPC, you can bring in your ingestion label. On the HTTPS, also known as sort of data plane API, the ingestion labels are on the log level as opposed to gRPC where they're on the batch level. And that feature is still in preview for enabling customers to that log level set of labels coming in, right? And so we'll have to wait a little bit of time for us to roll that out to more customers. Once we're ready to, then we can enable you to have those labels for the HTTPS. So if labels is a very important use case for you right now, I would recommend to use the gRPC or wait for us to enable it on HTTPS.
Great, thanks, Utsav. James, I know you wanted to jump in and answer a question, answer one of the Splunk questions from Rahim.
Yeah, I'll take a run at it. He's talking about using the heavy forwarder and coming out of Splunk and then splitting the data into both Splunk and SecOps. And frankly, the heavy forwarder is great because it can output various different kinds of formats and protocols, and not great because it also adds a bunch of data to the stream. And so Bindplane would expect one of two things: either data that's raw and uncooked, or data coming over HEC. Unfortunately, it's not going to be able to support Splunk proprietary protocol, right? So the best practice there is probably going to be to either convert the stream headed into SecOps of one of those two, right? Either HEC or uncooked. And then continue sending on your normal stream as well into Splunk, or you split it before the heavy and you use something like your universal forwarder is converted over to HEC, directly into SecOps and split there. There's a couple of different options there. I'm happy to find your contact information in the registration information and hit you up personally and chat about it.
Great, thanks. I have another one here from, they're coming in hot. So from David, if we have a 12-month, or is the 12-month forwarding capability renewable if I have a multi-annual contract?
I can answer that one. So as far as what you get for Bindplane Enterprise Google Edition, which is part of SecOps Enterprise Plus, that is for 12 months. So you get 12 months of access to a non-Google destination. If you do want to renew on that, you can renew with us directly for that particular capability, and that would be part of Bindplane Enterprise Edition.
Great, thank you, Craig. Real quick, I can answer one that just popped in, Ayush, and for anyone else that's curious, we will post the recording of this session under Resource Center, under webinars and podcasts. It will also include the slides, so look for that in the next coming days. It'll also have some of the questions and answers that we've talked about. Okay, going back to the other questions here. One from Rohit. Let's say I want to pull alerts from Cybereason API and push it to SecOps. How do I do that?
Excellent question. So I'm not that familiar with Cybereason, which we can perhaps talk offline about that. If it is generically HTTP or it will emit something to like a JSON file, that would be the easiest way to do it. Another way to do this perhaps is to create a script to then query that API, then output to a file. So this is how we've achieved some of those open-ended type of use cases. Perhaps we can connect directly on this and see if it's something we could do with a source today with a little bit of configuration.
Great, thanks, Craig. I have another one here from Siraj. I'd like to know if Bindplane has any built-in mechanism to send email notifications in the following cases. 1, when an agent stops reporting, and 2, when logs are not received for a defined period of time.
So the short answer is no, as far as built-in alerting mechanisms. What we really have done is move that type of functionality to the destination platform. So with silent host monitoring, you can achieve both of those use cases, either within SecOps with the rules-based alerting, or within the Google Cloud Observability side through some of the metrics and alerting there.
Great, great. Okay, we have time for a couple more. One from Raul. Do you recommend installing an agent locally in a source to collect logs, or do you recommend pulling logs remotely from Collector Gateway?
Both of those are supported. It really depends on what your goals are. But for the most part, if it's greenfield, I would recommend installing the agent locally on the endpoint, because that way you may need to collect multiple log types, and then you have that type of capability, as opposed to then forwarding over single log types over something like syslog. But again, both of those are supported, and makes a lot of sense when you're gathering logs for something like a firewall, where you don't have the option of installing locally.
Great, great. This one's from Corey. When reviewing the Google Docs in regards to the Bindplane server, do I understand correctly that server itself is optional and we do not need cloud or on-prem server installation? From the document, it says these deployments can reside in Google SecOps and Google Cloud. Many Google SecOps customers use Bindplane server, but its use is optional.
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, it's true that you do not have to use the server. We would recommend it because it makes managing your configs much easier. We have seen some customers, especially if they don't have an Open Telemetry expertise, create some errors if they don't use the server, right? Because as you're building out these processors, you might make something that's just formatted incorrectly, for example. Versus if you're using the server, it'll help you keep those in check and manage that. So I would say maybe if you're a customer that has a lot of Open Telemetry expertise, or you have a reason you don't want to use the server, you don't have to, but generally it's recommended, and you're going to have probably less issues you're going to run into. It'll be easier to debug those issues, all that sort of stuff, if you are using the server.
Great, thank you. One from Nayan. Can we support the following use case? For example, if a customer subscribes to 1 terabyte of data and then suppresses those specific metrics, can we still generate on an alert?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. It would depend where they are doing that kind of filtering. So if they have a terabyte of data, they are expecting a terabyte of data, that is the standard, but then they're doing something like filtering at the Bindplane side before the data leaves, it's only going to look like, say, 500 gig coming in to something like SecOps on the API side. So we won't have as much visibility that they would be expecting that 1 terabyte of data. But on the other hand, if they're expecting that 1 terabyte of data to land within SecOps itself, with the rules-based alerting approach, you can specify that to be something like the minimum amount of data that is sent, and then you can build alerting based on that. So similar to what we're doing with silent host monitoring, go ahead and take a look at that documentation is what I would recommend, and then see if you could create a alert policy from there.
Great, thanks, Craig. And last question for you all. And thank you, everyone, for being so engaged and posting your questions. For those that don't get answered, we'll continue to answer them in the post. But this one's from Tiffany Brooks. When installing Bindplane server or collector, do we need to modify the auth.json file ownership? Should the owner be Bindplane or BDOT?
Yeah, interesting question. So the way that it works is when you build the configuration to have the destination, you put that JSON file context within Bindplane server itself that is encrypted in the backend, and then that is then pushed down, and that is also masked. We have some options there as well on the actual file system. So we do have some mechanisms as far as securing.
Great, great. Well, that is all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everyone, on this webinar for posting all your questions and being so engaged. Continue to post your questions once we post the actual recording of this webinar so we can continue to answer your questions. We'll take a lot of this stuff offline and get back to you. But thank you to our speakers and our co-hosts, Utsav, Craig, James. Thanks for all the information on the deprecation of the forwarder and how to use Bindplane. Really appreciate your guidance here. And thank you all that joined us today. Thanks for your participation. We look forward to seeing you on additional webinars in community. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.